Hey everyone, welcome for our lunch and learn here with our friends from Find Great People. We're glad to have you on the call today. I'm particularly looking forward to this topic about nonprofit success metrics because, in my role as operations here at Together SC, I'm always looking at how do we measure things, how do we know we're doing well, how do we know our people are doing well. And so I want to welcome Carrie Kavanaugh from Find Great People, who's going to talk with us about nonprofit success metrics. Carrie.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Ben or Benjamin when you write it. He told me. I was like, is it Benjamin or Ben? And he said, Ben when I speak, Benjamin when I write. So, all right, we're going to go with Ben. So, thank you all for having me today. I am thrilled to be talking about success metrics. My background is primarily in compensation. I do regular HR work, so I understand what you guys are going through with employees some days. Today you might have increased absences because where we live, it's rainy and dreary, and that's typically a day we find that people might not feel so well. So if you're having staffing issues today, I feel for you. So, but we want to move in and talk about success metrics. And one of the reasons that this is so important, and it's so important for you guys to be thinking about because we know that the nonprofit sector is an essential contributor to the economy. And you guys employ about almost 12 million people on your own. And you guys are growing faster than a lot of sectors. But that doesn't shield you from lingering economic impact. And so we're probably hearing from employees now more than ever, hey, I want to
Hey,
talk about pay.
I'm so sorry, Carrie. I don't mean to interrupt, but I think we are seeing your whole presentation with your notes
Oh, well, you don't need to
rather
see that.
than presentation mode, and that's
All
what
right.
you might want to know.
Yeah, that sounds good. Let's do that. Sorry. Um, let's see here.
If you go to slideshow,
Yeah, that's where I am. Let's see. I've
I
got
can
it on
hear
normal.
you.
Let's see. Here we go. All right. There we go. Sorry, folks. Again, technology is it's not, I apologize. Um, so when we want to think about when it comes to things like success metrics, we want to make sure that when our employees are coming to us and saying, hey, I want to consider a pay increase for me, or how can I give back more to the organization? We want to be able to put some real metrics in place because some of the things that we often measure people on are very subjective. So if you think about like communication or attention to detail, that's really hard sometimes to measure. So what I want to talk about in our limited time to here is talking about key performance indicators or things that you all can use in your organizations to make sure that you're measuring what is important to the organization. I have a mentor of mine always said, what gets measured gets done. And so we want to measure the things that drive the success, the mission, and the vision of the organization. So, what is a key performance indicator? It's a KPI. You've probably heard that term before, but it's designed to help you streamline operations, reduce administrative time, increase retention rates, and stay competitive. And if we set them up right, it really will allow us the opportunity to measure what really counts. So, what we want to do when we're talking about KPIs, specifically for nonprofits, we want to talk about measurements that gauge your ability to accomplish your mission. And we want to be able to do that in a quantifiable way. So, with a number, with a data point. And what's interesting about that is it's a new theory to some employees to be measured on a data point. And Ben and I were talking before everybody got on the call about how to set those up in a way that encourages employees versus scares them. Because we don't ever want to set a metric that an employee thinks or an organization thinks, if I don't meet this number, I'm going to be fired. That's not ever the goal. The goal is to say, where do we need to get people to be, what the results need to be in order to drive forward our mission. And so that's what we're going to look at. So here are the challenges that we can help address through developing these KPIs. So we can focus on the mission and the impact rather than just revenue. And revenue is an important number. Don't get me wrong. I know as someone who's involved with nonprofits, who supports nonprofits, who's sat on nonprofit boards, revenue is a big number. But if we're not using that money the right way and getting the results, we have a harder time going back and asking for more money. And these kind of KPIs help us when we're in front of donors, when we're writing grants, to be able to show the true impact of our work. So we want to help address the focus and put it on the mission and the impact. We want to be able to look at donor retention. We want to look at volunteer recruitment, volunteer retention, and we want to be able to spend our money and spend our time where it really matters. Hey, I know financial management can be complex and time consuming. I am not a checkbook balancer. That's how old I am. Yeah, I just use the word checkbook. So some of you know what I'm talking about, but I don't balance mine. So financial management can be pretty complex and time consuming. Fundraising. I mean, I don't know a lot of people that really love to go out and ask people for money. Now, you've got some people on your teams that do it really, really well, but please don't ask me to go out and ask for money because I'm not very good at it. But through a KPI, we can see how well we're doing when it comes to things like fundraising and marketing. So, we've got social media accounts, we market our services, but do we ever stop and say, was this an effective use of our time and our money? Because when you think about fundraising, it's just kind of like sales. Not all sales, not all fundraising is good fundraising. Because if you have to go out and spend hours and hours and hours of time and lots of money to get back only 10% more than you spent, is that really a good use of your time and your labor? And we also know that there's competition with other organizations for funding, volunteers, and attention. And we want to set up these KPIs so that we can tell if we're doing a good job. So I've got 8 that I'm going to be sharing with you today. There are many others that we could look at, but the 8 that I think really help drive performance, especially of your employees and of the people that work for you. So let's kind of talk about those. One of the big ones that I like is a donor retention rate. And sometimes nonprofits don't stop and look at that. And a lot of times we don't say, how much are we getting donors to repeat that donation towards us over a period of time? And that's a great incentive or a great KPI to use with our fundraising team. Now, we've got to be really careful about creating metrics around fundraising, right? We don't just want to talk about the amount of money that we bring in, but we know that donors are the backbone to our nonprofit organizations. You can read lots of statistical data about organizations that that survive off $5 and $10 donations because they get them all the time from the same people over and over again. And so we need to identify areas where this might not be working for us. And what we can do is look at who continues to support us over time versus that one-time donor. Because if we're spending 40 man hours to get one person to donate $1,000, well, that's great. That's $1,000. But if we could get 10 people to donate $100 and do it multiple times, we've made up that money and more. So I've got some on each of these slides. You'll see the statistics or the calculation on how we do that. So what I would say is let's start looking at how we are retaining our donors. And if we're not doing very well here, we've got to stop and ask ourselves why. And that's really kind of the ultimate question from all of these KPIs is, why aren't we doing well? And so we've got to look into that. But this is something I think is really important for us to consider when we're talking about fundraising and donor awareness, is look at who are we keeping? How about the donation conversion rate? Now, this is a fancy one, but how often do we send out blast emails or blast requests or but think about how often are we really converting that visitor to a donation? So we can do that. This one talks mostly about websites, but how many times do you offer a tour of your facility? How many of those people end up being a donor? One time I had the opportunity to go out and do the BMW performance driving school. I don't know if anyone's been able to do that, but it's really a neat experience if you get to do it. But one of the things they talk about is the percentage of people that within, I think it's 24 months of doing that driving experience buy a BMW. Now, I did not. So I was not one of their good statistics, but they highlight that. And it's this theory that once you come and see it and experience it, you want to support it. And so this helps us look at the ways that we're reaching out to people. Because if you think about it, there's multiple ways to reach people, right? There's snail mail, there's email, there's social media, there's, marketing on television, there's getting your name in the paper and the stories on TV. But which of those really work? And sometimes we're all guilty of having one of those that's our favorite. Because sometimes maybe it's easier or was effective in the past, or we don't like one because at one time it didn't work. But this helps us go back and say, is it working now? So we call this the donation conversion rate. And so how often are we talking to someone and converting that into $1? You could also look at this as donation of time. So a lot of organizations say, I want to make sure I've got volunteer hours. And so how many you can shift this to how often do I give a tour of the facility that converts into somebody becoming a volunteer on a regular basis. So we've got, again, the metric at the bottom, the calculation on just how to track it. And this is something, again, something that we can use with our employees, especially with a donation conversion or a volunteer conversion rate, that can be used as a measure of success for an employee. If our donation conversion rate is at 10%, we can set a goal for an individual to say, next year I want that at 20%. Now, as Ben and I were talking about earlier, we're not going to take it from 10% to 90% in a year, right? That's not realistic of a goal. But we can look at it and say, here's the opportunity to increase your value to the organization, which ultimately we could tie to pay, because people want to talk about pay. Volunteer retention rate. So I mentioned this one on the last slide, the percentage of volunteers who continue to volunteer for you. People have a choice of where they volunteer their time. And one of the things that you all know, I'm sure, is that we want to make sure that experience for a volunteer is a good one, that they enjoy what they're doing, that they feel some satisfaction of doing it. And I think all of us have been in a situation where we went to volunteer or we went to help with something and we got there and they didn't know who we were. They weren't expecting us. They didn't have really anything for us to do. And you sit around, and that's not a person who's going to come back. I will tell you, I went to sign up to volunteer at an organization in Greenville who will remain nameless. I'll tell you later if you want to hear it, but I'm not going to put it on a recording. And I went in to try to volunteer and no one would help me. And I finally got someone's attention and I said, I'd like to fill out an application to volunteer. This is a really important cause for me. And they were like, oh, okay, well, let me find an application. And they handed me an application, no clipboard or anything, and no pen. Now, I should have brought my own, I guess. And nobody cared that I was there. So I never volunteered there. And so those are the kind of things that you want to know what's going on. So volunteer retention rate can help us see that. And if you've got a volunteer coordinator on your staff, this is something we can use to measure their success. Volunteer satisfaction rate. Engagement surveys, satisfaction surveys sometimes scare people, but we've got to know if the people that are volunteering for us are enjoying what they're doing. And so tracking it and surveying our people, our volunteers on a regular basis is incredibly important. Now, you don't have to come up with some crazy fancy survey that you outsource to somebody. You can set it up on SurveyMonkey and ask 5 questions, but we can use the same 5 questions every quarter and we can start to see a number that says, are our volunteers happy? Are they satisfied with what they're doing? And again, for your volunteer coordinator, this is a great measurement to say, are we giving them an opportunity to do what they love and to really support our mission and vision? Because we know it takes a lot when you get a volunteer. A lot of organizations, you might have to run background checks or driving records or any of that. At a minimum, you're going to have a volunteer orientation. You're going to have all of this stuff that you're going to do before the volunteer is ever really doing the work. And I want to make sure that we keep them and that we engage them and that they enjoy what they're doing. Program efficiency rate. So this is the percentage of program expenses that go directly to the program services. And that's something you guys can look at financially. So, we want to make sure that our program efficiency rates are high. That tells us that we're using our resources effectively to attain our mission. So we just want to, it's a simple number, program expenses over total expenses. And we can just see what are we spending to get this done. And it'll help us then identify areas where we might need to improve some efficiency. Oh, everybody's favorite topic, fundraising, right? So we love fundraising, but it's not just about how much money you get. It's about the amount of money you bring in versus what you spent to get it. And having been on the fundraising side with nonprofits, I understand that you can plan a big event, but the bigger an event you plan, or the bigger the cost is, the more money you have to raise to make it work out and be worthwhile. And I think we've all probably gone to some events where they're proud to say they raised $500,000, but what you don't know is it costs $250,000 to plan the event. And is that a good return on your money versus when we look at that first one, which we were talking about, retention of donors, do we have an issue in looking at how much we're spending versus how much we're getting, and then how many of these people are continuing to support us? So I would always say that our fundraising people, our program people, need to be looking at fundraising and program efficiency. As opposed to telling somebody they did a great job planning an event, that the event was magical and beautiful and we sold out tickets. And we've all been to those events. And they're fabulous. But the big question is when you put where the rubber meets the road is, did we make any money off of it? And did we make enough to cover what we spent? And if you think about your total expenses are more than just the cash outlay for an event or for a program. Think about the costs that go along that are not really often measured. It's the time and the labor and the time cost, the labor cost, the volunteer cost of putting on those big fundraising events. So we just want to be cognizant of whether or not these are really helping us fuel the mission. Overhead rate. The percentage, you guys know this one, I'm sure, the percentage of total expenses that go towards administrative and fundraising. We need to know. One of the things that I see happen with some of my clients, both nonprofit and for-profit, is that we end up adding staff when often we need to just hold staff accountable for the work that they're doing. And occasionally, I'm not saying that's with everybody, but I do often get called about, hey, listen, I need to look at adding a staff to this. And I always say, well, tell me why we're adding staff. They're like, well, we're not getting all the work done. Well, why aren't we getting all the work done? Well, this person's not pulling their weight. Okay, well, let's talk about the person not pulling their weight before we talk about adding to staff. And that overhead can mushroom, very quickly. So we want to be cognizant of what we're spending towards administrative and fundraising events, because I am certain that that's a question you get in fundraising, right? What percentage of the money that I'm donating or a funder is giving you are going to overhead? And so we want to be really cognizant about how we're spending our money. So back to the initial question of the employee that says, I want to make more money. Well, who on this call doesn't want to make more money? But then the question is, how can we tie that to a way that we can go back to a funder and say, hey, yeah, we did give raises, but here's the metrics, and the way we set the metrics, we know we've made more money that way. We've got more revenue, we've got better numbers, and we're able to do that. So we want to make sure that we're looking at this. We got to keep our overhead low so that we can have the resources to deliver on that mission. And so we've got a formula here to show you how to do that. Social media engagement. So I think everybody here probably does work with social media, but what we want to know is what kind of interactions are people having with our content? And that would include the number of likes, the numbers of shares, the numbers of comments. And you know that something gets liked, something gets shared, we're going to see more and more people see it, and more people see it. And that's what we want. So when we have our social media or our marketing people, we've got to look at that engagement as a way of reaching potential donors and potential volunteers. So a high social media engagement rate is that of an organization doing a really good job of reaching out and understanding what makes people interested in engaging and clicking. And it takes a while to figure that out. Some people like things to be very interactive. Some people like videos. There's lots of different ways we can look at it, and you have to play around with it until you can find something that connects with your folks. What we do find is that the social media engagement rate is going to be higher when social media is done on a regular basis. If you're an organization that posts one thing every 6 months, we're going to have a horrible social media engagement rate. And this is where when we're looking at getting young donors and young volunteers, and I say that as someone who's not young, they are looking online for that. And younger employees are looking for the ways that companies reach out, how involved they are with the nonprofit world. So we want you to be out there and be seen by all of these folks so that they can go, that's the organization I want to support. But they're not going to find it, without you doing some really good work on reaching out. And there's no one right way to do it. There's no one wrong way to do it. It's going to be what works for your organization. So what I also want to make sure that we're talking about is when we're looking at KPIs. So those were just 8, and those are 8 quick and short ones that you can do that have a pretty simple way to measure them. Again, I'm not great with math, but those are pretty easy for me to do. The thing I think makes the most sense about something like this is it's a clear measurement of progress. And so we can take that young, I don't mean young in age, I mean young in tenure, experienced employee, and we can see how they're growing and developing. So if you've got somebody in social media, we can look at whatever that rate is right now, and we can see where it is in 6 months, and we can see where it is in a year, and we can see where it is in 18 months as a clear measurement of progress. When we get this kind of data, so let's just stay on that social media as an example, it's going to enhance our decision making. So if we know when we put the time and effort into an Instagram campaign, we're going to get higher click rates than when we do a Facebook campaign. Well, that makes it easy to make a decision about where to spend our money. Why wouldn't we spend it in Instagram instead of Facebook if that's where we're getting the click rates? Also improves accountability. So a social media person can't come to you and say, well, I'm doing my best. Okay, I hear you, but let's talk about what's going right. And we have a number to kind of back it up. Now, again, there's always caveats. Ben and I were talking beforehand. If you think about how everything changed during COVID, right? We all had to stop, back up, KPIs got changed because we knew we weren't going to, we weren't having events, those kind of things. So we know that, again, this is not about finding a way to fire someone, but it is a way to look at accountability. And then it allows better resource allocation, because if we're looking at that increased click rate to increased volunteer rate to an increased donor rate, then we're going to put more money down there in social media, because if we can see it linking those 3, it makes a whole lot more sense to put our money there than one big gala. Again, I love a gala. Don't get me wrong. I'm not picking on galas, but we just want to know that our money's coming back to us. So I want to stop now and give you guys a chance to ask questions. I know we have about 4 or 5 minutes left in our 30-minute time frame, but I wanted to see if anybody has any questions. I'm happy to address them with you now.
Hey, Susan.
Hey, I just had a question about, I hear that, and you may have said this while we were sitting here, sorry. But the galas and things, it sound, from my understanding, they are not going as well as they used to prior to COVID. And so we have never had one. We actually
Mhm.
had this is our 5th year as a nonprofit, and we were going to have a music concert gala thing,
Yeah.
and then it was canceled due to COVID, and then we have never
Never
done
brought it
that
back.
again.
Yeah.
So I was just
I-
curious if it's any bit on the uptick again, but it could just be the individuals
I
that
think
I
it has,
talked to.
yeah, I think it has a lot to do with the organizations. And I certainly would love for anybody on the call to reach out to Susan if they've got kind of a successful gala kind of concept. I've been to some that are amazing, right? And I know they make money for the organization. My whole point, again, I'm not slamming galas. I love a gala, and they are wonderful ways to showcase what your organization's doing. All I ever suggest for nonprofits and my for-profit clients is make sure you're getting a return on your investment. And that's incredibly important. And I was a member of an organization, or am a member of an organization, and we used to do a gala or a big party. And, it eventually got to where we were finding that we weren't making the money off of it to kind of, when you looked at the time and the labor of all the volunteers to put it on, it was, you weren't, the ROI wasn't there. And so we said, hey, let's look at a different way. But if the ROI is high, you gala the night away. I would want to gala the night away. You do it all night long, and you keep doing it, and you keep doing it as long as the ROI is high. It is just something, I always tell people, look at the ROI on all of this. That's what we've talked about here. It's really, where are we spending our money, and how are we going to get some accountability from it? Again, I focus primarily on compensation, and I deal all the time with employees that say, I want to make more money. And I like to be able to pay people more money. And nonprofits, you guys are in a tricky spot because you are trying to recruit the best and the brightest with nonprofit dollars. And that's hard. And so we want to make sure that we can do things to make sure we're spending our money the right way, so that we earn more money, so that we can get more money to the people that are doing that work. But I want to make sure that the work's getting done in a way that still fulfills the mission and the vision of why you exist in the first place. And these KPIs are also a great way. And I do love to create incentive plans. And I think that the nonprofit world is starting to kind of come around to the concept of incentive plans for their employees. So, if you have a social media person and you want to offer them a bonus program or an incentive plan, we look at those social media engagement rates. That's a great way to measure someone and say, if you get it from 10 to 20, you're going to get a bonus of X or Y, because if we can go in and tie that the social media engagement leads us to more volunteers or more donors, then that $1,000 bonus or whatever we give to that person is going to pay for itself. And that's what we want to set up. And that's why we've got to have the number behind it too. And so when you're going to write a grant, or you have a big donor sitting in front of you, you can show all the work you're doing and how you're measuring it carefully to make sure you really are getting the bang for your buck. But Susan, thanks for bringing that up. And if anybody has some great insight on big events, reach out to Susan. She'd probably love to talk through it with you.
And that sounds like an excellent question to post in the Development Peer Network discussion group.
That sounds great.
Freedom Readers.
Yes, hello. I was having some tech issues, and so I missed that first KPI that you shared, the one before, donation conversion rate.
Mhm.
What was
The donor retention rate was the first one.
perfect?
So how many of our donors are we getting to repeat their donations with us? So, and I always tell people, ask yourself that question. So, if you are donating to an organization, why are you a repeat donor? And when I say repeat donor, so you can think about what that so we show here that with the period, and you can say, are we donating annually or quarterly or monthly? But I mean, I ask everybody on this call, besides your own organization, what organizations do you support on a regular basis that your name would come up as someone who's a retained donor? And then ask yourself why. Like, why is that? And then let's talk about that from your organization's perspective.
Yeah. luckily we have a system. Our donor management system does do some of
That's
these,
great.
but not all of these. So I'm excited. Thank you.
Yeah, that's great. Well, we're happy to put this in front of everybody. Any other questions? Thank you, Freedom Readers.
Any other questions?
And we'll definitely share this. My contact information is on the last slide, and I'm happy to answer any questions offline at FGP. Some of you may know Eleanor Dunlop. She is a phenomenal consultant on our team, handles most of our nonprofit work, does all kinds of strategy, those kind of things. So I promise you, I can work with questions like this, but she can do a lot more stuff than I can. But we do love supporting nonprofits in South Carolina, and have a lot of nonprofit clients. So my heart goes out to all of them.
Thank you so much, Carrie. This has been a
Thanks,
wonderful
Ben.
presentation. And this is something new we're trying, where we're doing like a little 30-minute webinar instead of the full hour.
I like a
little
30-minute
quick
webinar.
Lunch and learn for everyone. So
Yep.
let us know also in the survey after this if the timing was right for y'all, or if you're saying, hey, wait, we missed the 1 hour. But let us know. And of course, we've recorded this and we'll post it up on YouTube. And we'll have the presentation available as well. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thanks, y'all. Have a great day. Stay dry.